Nunnally here, and due to the time of year, I thought it would be good for us to consider a current development as well as an ancient story. I'd like to take a look at both the ancient biblical version of the birth of Jesus and then take a look at a more modern version or revision of that. So let's take a few minutes just to take a look at the biblical story of the birth of Jesus. This is the Gospel of Luke chapter 2. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David that is called Bethlehem. So Joseph's going to Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged, actually betrothed to him, and was with child. And it came about while they were there that the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And in the same region there were some shepherds staying out in the fields, and keeping watch over their flock by night. And the angel said to them, "Today in the city of David," not near, not beside, not close to, but in the city of David, "there has been born for you a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger." And the shepherds began saying to one another, "Let us go straight to Bethlehem," not near, beside, close to, but to Bethlehem then, "and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they came in haste. They found their way to Mary and Joseph and the baby as he was laying in a manger. So just real quick, because this is a real story set in real places in real time. Here you have a picture on the screen of the city of Nazareth. Today, the city of Nazareth is gigantic. It's about 22,000 people strong. But in Jesus' day, there was a little tiny town of Nazareth that was about 400 people strong. This is the Church of the Annunciation that I'm circling with my cursor, and it marks the spot of the appearance of the angel Gabriel to Mary, making the announcement that she was going to be the chosen vessel through whom the Messiah would be born. Now, if you go looking north, if you go to the brow of the hill that Nazareth is built on, there is behind it, north of it, a large valley. It's called the Beit Netophah Valley. It's actually mentioned in the Bible. And if you look at the very edge of this picture here, on the far side of the Beit Netophah Valley is a little mound on which a first century village set, which is called Cana of Galilee, mentioned in John chapter 2, where Jesus, just 9 miles from his place where he was raised in Nazareth, 9 miles north of there, where Jesus worked his first miracle. So this is a real town, and they go from a real town to another real town, to Bethlehem in Judea, about 60 miles to the south of Nazareth. And here in this cross-shaped church, under that roof lies the Church of the Nativity, where Jesus was born, presumably in a cave. And if you look beyond Bethlehem to the east, there's the edge of the modern city of Bethlehem, and this whole area back behind in the background is the Judean wilderness, or the wilderness of Judah. If you look in the foreground, again, here's the Church of the Nativity, there is what is called Manger Square, where you get all kinds of pictures, visuals, the eve before Christmas of Nativity Square. And so these are real places, real time, real events, no legend, no myth, and in the Gospel of Luke, a very stripped down version. Let's compare that to a more recent version of the birth of Jesus. And I have referred to it as the myth of Migdal Eder. You may have heard of it. It's all over the place in movies and in sermons. It's all over the internet in posts and forwards that you get. It's in email messages that you get from friends. And let's take a look at the modern version and compare that to the ancient version. What we're told in the more recent version of the birth of Jesus is that these shepherds that show up in the Gospel of Luke chapter 2 are not just normal shepherds, but they're actually priestly shepherds dispatched from the temple to take care of specific flocks. And they were the only flocks that were allowed to be raised in the entire land of Israel, and they were for the purpose of sacrifice in the temple. Because they were destined to be sacrifices in the temple, they had to be without blemish. And so as soon as they were born, according to this version of the story, the shepherds would swaddle these newborn lambs, and they would lay them in a manger for their own safekeeping so that they would not incur a blemish. They would swaddle these lambs with the worn out garments of priests that were then torn into shreds and used to wrap up the newborn lambs so that they wouldn't hurt themselves. And all of this is happening in an area that is called Migdal Eder, or the Tower of the Flock in Hebrew. And this is actually the place where Jesus was born. And all of that is the reason why the shepherds would have been able to very easily identify Jesus as the newborn Messiah. Where exactly does this new version of the birth of Jesus come from? It's definitely not the version that is quoted by Linus in Charlie Brown's Christmas, and one maybe that you haven't heard of before. If not, you probably will. When you do, you'll know how to interact with this. Where does that version come from? It seems to have originated about a century and a half ago in the writings of a scholar at the University of Oxford by the name of Alfred Edersheim. He wrote a book, actually two books that were eventually combined into one volume, called The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. I've shown on the screen the older version of this that you can get used on the internet for about $6, and then a newer version that you can get for about $20. This is what Edersheim says, and this is where the myth begins about 150 years ago. The Messiah was to be revealed from Migdal Eder, the tower of the flock. This Migdal Eder was not the watchtower for ordinary flocks which pastured on the barren sheep ground beyond Bethlehem, but lay close to town. Notice he's very clear about this. It's not inside of Bethlehem. It's not like Migdal Eder and Bethlehem are interchangeable or synonymous, but lay close to town on the road to Jerusalem. A passage in the Mishnah, says Edersheim, leads to the conclusion that the flocks which pastured there were destined for temple sacrifices, and accordingly, the shepherds who watched over them were not ordinary shepherds. So let's talk then more about this location of the birth of the Messiah, the birth of Jesus. Was it in the town of Bethlehem, or was it outside in an area that is known as Migdal Eder, or the Tower of the Flock? The story actually, at least for Edersheim, begins in Genesis 35:21. It says Israel, or Jacob, back in the days of the patriarchs, was journeying on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder, or in Hebrew, Migdal Eder. Well, this is amplified by a later commentary, sort of a paraphrase on the Bible that was written in Aramaic, called the Targum of Pseudo-Jonathan. And it says, Jacob spread his tent beyond the Tower of Eder, or Migdal Eder, the place from which it is to be that the King Messiah will be revealed at the end of days. So there's several problems with this. First of all, the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan probably didn't exist in Jesus' day and wouldn't for another couple of hundred years. As a translation from the original Hebrew of Genesis 35:21, it's an Aramaic paraphrase that probably didn't come into existence until sometime between the 2nd and the 5th centuries AD. Another problem with the use of this particular passage is that it says very clearly, at the end of days. So this is not a reference to the birth of the Messiah, it's a reference to the Messiah's appearance at the end of human history, at the end of time. So chronology doesn't exactly match the Gospel of Luke. This is a reference to the end of time. We would say the second coming or the return of Jesus rather than his birth as a baby. There's another passage that is referred to, and all we're doing in this particular section of this video is looking at sources behind this new reconstruction of the events surrounding the birth of Jesus. Micah chapter 4, verse 8 is a passage that not Edersheim, he doesn't refer to this, but those who build on his work, those who are still adding to the legend today, will refer to Micah chapter 4, verse 8. Let's take a look at it. But as for you, tower of the flock, and the Hebrew definitely is Migdal Eder, but the word Migdal or tower, a large, tall structure, and then Eder, a flock or a herd. These are both very common words that show up in Hebrew all over the Old Testament as well as elsewhere. So, tower of the flock is for you, tower of the flock. And then, beautiful poetic parallelism Micah uses, the prophet Micah of the Hebrew Bible. He says, the hill of the daughter of Zion. To you will come, even the former dominion will come. Former refers back to the days of David and Solomon, the united, powerful kingdom of the kingdom of Israel. The former dominion, the kingdom of the, again, daughter of Jerusalem. So we have this beautiful poetic parallelism that says that this Migdal Eder is also called the daughter of Zion and is called the daughter of Jerusalem. Zion and Jerusalem being synonymous. So this Migdal Eder is not a reference to some place around Bethlehem, but rather it's a reference to the city of Jerusalem, which was the seat of power in the days of David and Solomon. So completely irrelevant with respect to birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. Micah chapter 5 is probably a better source of information from ancient texts for us, because the prophet Micah says, and he's quoted in the Gospel of Matthew, in Matthew's story of the early days of Jesus, but as for you, Bethlehem Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you will come forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. So according to the biblical prophet Micah, quoted by the Gospel of Matthew and applied directly to Jesus, Jesus' birth is supposed to be in Bethlehem, not in some other place, whether Migdal Eder or another place. Let's address another issue in this more modern version of the birth of Jesus. Were there actually priestly shepherds present in the area surrounding Bethlehem? And were they actually raising sacrificial flocks that were the only flocks allowed to be raised in the land of Israel in Jesus' day? Back to Alfred Edersheim, the original source of this new birth narrative. In fact, says Edersheim, the Mishnah expressly forbids the keeping of flocks throughout the land of Israel, and the only flocks otherwise kept would be those for the temple services, for sacrifice in the temple, he means. And accordingly, the shepherds who watched over them were not ordinary shepherds. So, three things real quick. Not an ordinary flock, not ordinary shepherds, and this was the only flock that was allowed to be kept in the land of Israel, because they were supposedly, according to Edersheim, providing sacrificial animals for the altar in the temple in Jerusalem. Let's take a look at some non-biblical, some rabbinic passages from the material of the early rabbis that directly contradict this reconstruction. The Mishnah, if cattle were found in Jerusalem as far as Migdal Eder or within the like distance in any direction. So in 360 degrees around Jerusalem, the distance between Jerusalem and wherever Migdal Eder is, it's never been found, it's not a secure location, but in that distance all the way around Jerusalem, surrounding Jerusalem in every direction, it says that male animals, cattle, small animals, were deemed to be whole burnt offerings and females to be peace offerings. Rabbi Judah says it's fitting to be Passover offerings, and they must be deemed Passover offerings if they're found during the 30 days prior to Passover. So we're dealing with lost animals, animals of unsure ownership. And so these then, when they are found, are to be ceded over to control of the temple and to be used in things like not just Passover offerings, but as whole burnt offerings, and females can be used. And so this particular passage is not saying that there were shepherds and special flocks in the area of Migdal Eder exclusively that were intended for temple service. Instead, it says anywhere within that general area around Jerusalem, 360 degrees. The distance being, the Migdal Eder simply being used as a distance marker. Here's another text. One may, and this is also from the rabbis, one may not raise small domesticated animals in the land of Israel. Now this is where the whole idea of this was a unique flock and the only one that was being raised in the land of Israel. But take notice that that's not what the rabbis say. Here's the particular prohibition forbidding the raising of small domesticated animals, but one may raise them in Syria and in the wildernesses of the land of Israel. Here's another text. The rabbis say one may not raise small domesticated animals in the land of Israel except for, and then there are some exceptions, one may raise them in the forests of the land of Israel and in the wildernesses, plural by the way, of the land of Israel, and in the wilderness that is in Judah. So specifically the rabbis are telling us that it is allowed to raise small domesticated animals like sheep, goats, and the lambs and kids of those in the wilderness that is in Judah. That is directly relevant to our discussion because that is the part, one of the wildernesses of the land of the Bible that is directly connected to the city of Bethlehem. Here's another exception to the rule or problem for the current theory of Jesus' birth. In rabbinic literature again, Rabban Gamliel or Gamaliel's students, this is the Gamaliel of the book of Acts, so this is first century stuff. They asked Rabbi Gamaliel, what is the rule for how you live your life, the halakha, with regard to the raising of small domesticated animals in the land of Israel? And Gamaliel says it is permitted. So not all rabbinic authorities forbade the raising of certain animals. And according to these earlier texts that we looked at, there are all kinds of places, forests, wildernesses, etc., all around the land of Israel, including, most especially and most importantly, the wilderness directly adjacent to Bethlehem, where it was completely acceptable, totally permitted for the raising of animals, and not just animals for sacrifice and by special shepherds and stuff like that, which those texts never even mentioned. So what about the next problem? The swaddling of lambs. And I'm going to do for the second time in my whole life what I've always said I wouldn't do, and that is to quote myself. There is an article, and you're welcome to take a look at it. We'll show you where it can be found. But it basically says this, my article says this: there's never a place in ancient Jewish literature of any kind, not the Bible, not the Dead Sea Scrolls, not the Between the Testaments Apocrypha or the Between the Testaments Pseudepigrapha, not anywhere in Josephus or Philo, both first century authors, nowhere in the writings of the rabbis or any other kind of literature that you can find anywhere that says that lambs were ever swaddled at birth. Even with respect to sacrificial animals, no reference ever anywhere to anyone ever swaddling lambs. I've asked a number, because I'm in Israel a whole lot, I asked teaching, researching, I have asked numerous Jewish shepherds as well as Palestinian shepherds, tell me about the swaddling of newborn lambs. And their response is, what? Where did you ever get an idea like that? Well, there's this theory back in the United States. They said, wait a minute. If you swaddle a newborn lamb, that newborn lamb dies within a couple of hours because of lack of nourishment. See, sheep, female mother sheep, cannot pick up a swaddled lamb and bring that to the breast to nurse in the same way that a human mother can do. So there's simply not a chance for that newborn lamb to gain any kind of nourishment desperately needed after the difficulty of childbirth. So again, I'm referencing myself, the recently posted article, Modern Midrash, The Myth of Migdal Eder. And so it's the rest of the discussion you can find there, and that is where this quote comes from. That was me, sorry. Priestly garments as swaddling clothes. The next question that we need to address. Is there a place, is there evidence that demonstrates or that supports this assertion in the new birth narrative, the new version of the birth of Jesus? So in Tractate Sukkot of the Mishnah, you can find this online. This is not something squirreled away in a library anymore. The text of the rabbis says this: the worn trousers of the priests and their belts they would loosen, and they would tear strips to use as wicks. And with them they would light the 4 candelabras in the court of the women, which is a part of the temple. It's an internal component of the temple. So, yes, there was a secondary use of priestly garments, never, however, as swaddling cloths. Some have even suggested in this new birth narrative that these worn out garments of priests were also used to wrap people after they died and were being buried. Think, for example, Lazarus, John chapter 11. The problem with that is that once something is dedicated, once that it is made kadosh, it is sanctified, it's holy, it is only to be used for that particular purpose. So these worn out trousers, yes, they could be reused as wicks, but only as wicks in candelabras in the temple, and never outside, never for something that would cause them to contract ritual impurity, like, for example, burying somebody or coming in contact with the afterbirth of a human child that had just been born. So this is simply a non-starter. It doesn't work. There aren't any passages from ancient rabbinic literature that support it, and it's also nonsensical with respect to the rules of ritual purity and that sort of thing. Let me encourage you, if you want more discussion, if you want additional detail, if you want a more detailed treatment of the biblical as well as outside the Bible passages that are used, whether by Edersheim or by other people who have followed him, taken him as a source of inspiration, let me encourage you to take a look at the full article that was recently posted. You can find that on my website, wavenunnally.com. All you do is you put that in your browser, you click at the top of the page on articles, and articles will come up, and then you click on this particular icon right here, the Modern Midrash, the Myth of Migdal Eder, as another way that you can get to that, and that is to go to Facebook. If you are happy with and comfortable with migrating around your way around Facebook, go to Facebook and then type in Wave Nunnally, and my page within Facebook will come up, and you can then click on this particular icon. Again, it's the Myth of Migdal Eder. I think that it is what we're doing here is important. It's important for a number of reasons. Let me just discuss a couple of those with you in our remaining moments. First of all, we have an account of the birth of Jesus. It's very stripped down, it's very straightforward, and it's not really difficult to understand, to interpret. It really doesn't need any interpretation. Honestly, nor does it need amplification, additions, revisions, etc. If someone wants to engage in that, then those individuals should at least be able to bring forth evidence for their additions. We can better understand this, or this becomes clearer if we consult rabbinic literature, or Josephus, or whatever. But that's not really what's going on here. We've looked at the primary sources that were appealed to by Alfred Edersheim, and we found that he misused those sources. Those who are engaging in further amplifying Edersheim are simply building on a faulty foundation, and they're not citing sources either for any of these various components of this new birth narrative or new version of the birth of Jesus that is showing up in places all over today, on YouTube videos and in sermons and the like. So what I would encourage you to do is, a great takeaway is stick with the evidence. Feel free to ask teachers, preachers, authors, can you show me the ancient evidence on which you are basing your conclusions? I would also encourage you to stick with the Bible as written. It's good enough as is. It's a beautiful story. It's also grounded and rooted in historical reality, in geographical reality, in cultural and linguistic reality. And we do this kind of stuff all the time here in this studio. Episode after episode, we will dive into a passage from the Hebrew Bible, a passage from the New Testament, and we will bathe that in archaeological, geographical, literary, linguistic evidence, and then try to bring all that to bear for us to better understand all these years after those events or after those words were written. That's the way that we approach our study of these ancient texts. That's what they deserve. And so you please feel empowered and feel free to ask, where's the beef? Where's the evidence? Show me in black and white. Show me what has been found in archaeology or whatever that would support your assertions. And if those kinds of things, that kind of evidence is not forthcoming, then I want you to please just feel free to dismiss those claims, dismiss those assertions, dismiss those interpretations. I'd also encourage you that if you are on a regular basis listening to people who engage in this kind of, quote, pseudo-scholarship, that you find that this is a pattern, that you feel free to dismiss them as a trustworthy or a legitimate source for Bible interpretation and application. God's Word is good. It's a lamp to our feet. It's a light to our path. It's the truth that sets us free. So you be encouraged today and for the rest of your life to fully pursue God through His Word and via the evidence. Hey, at this time of year, special year, time when we celebrate the birth of Jesus, let me just encourage you to dial in on truth, to pursue Him at this time of your life, this time of the year, for all that you're worth. Go for broke, and dial in on that which is solid, that which is biblically based, which is evidentially based, and you will grow and go from strength to strength, and God's Word and biblical reality will never fail you. Have an awesome week serving Him. Seek Him while He can be found. Seek Him for all that you're worth, and enjoy this most beautiful time of the year as you seek Him and as you serve Him by serving others created in His image. Merry Christmas.